Hey everyone, welcome back to the Wacaco channel. I'm Brodie and today we're going to do a side-by-side look at the Cuppamoka and the Pipamoka. They're both filter coffee brewers from Wacaco, making pretty similar results when it comes to the final brew, but very different processes to get there. So first we got the Cuppamoka, right? This is a more of a conventional pour over, and then we have the Pipamoka, which is a very unique and different style of extracting coffee. So the key differences here are the Cuppamoka uses a filter paper, traditional pour over style, which I'll get into in a second. And I wanted to show you that you can actually change this vessel out for both of them to the Octaroma, right? So we've got this yellow Octaroma here. So if you wanted to switch things up, you can do that for both of these brewers. But today, I'm just going to show you how it looks with the Cuppamoka. And now we can really see the distinction. And the Pipamoka, it uses a twist action to extract the coffee using vacuum pressure or negative pressure. So that's pretty interesting. We're going to get into that in a second. And just to kind of sum it up here, both of them come with these little scoops so you can scoop your coffee. But today we're going to be measuring everything out with the hexagram and grinding up with the Exagrind. So let's get into it with the Cuppamoka first for a brew tutorial. We're gonna get out our Exagrind, and this is already preset to 40 clicks. Tear that up, and I'm gonna measure out 15 grams because I know that that's my desired dose for the Cuppamoka. You can go up to around 20 grams with this brewer, but I find it works best at this dose. We're just gonna grind that up. All right, so we've got our dose here. And just wanted to show you a little bit inside the Cuppamoka. First, we've got our drip tray, all right? And then this expands into its own little pour over unit, right? So this screws in, but it locks at the top. So we put that there. And then of course the Cuppamoka does come with a starter pack of little paper filters here, but we always like to give those a quick rinse to get rid of any papery flavor. So we got our hot water. And of course you can use hot water from the sink. It doesn't have to be filtered, of course, but just water to rinse out that papery taste. And one quick thing I wanted to show you with the Exagram Pro is, before we get any further, all we have to do is switch this to the P setting. This is the pour over setting. And then it will tear our scale just like this. So we're at 0. We already measured our coffee, but what I'm gonna do is put that in now. And then I'm going to just hit the timer button, all right? It's gonna beep a few times and it's gonna set everything back to 0 again, including the time. And what that does is it allows us to go into the pour over mode. So right now, I'm making a nice pour over, and I'm gonna stop at around the number 3 that shows up. Now, this is not grams or milliliters of water. This is actually calculating the ratio that we want. Basically, the ratio for a pour over that I like to go for is 1 to 15. That's kind of the range that I typically work within. If you go a little bit lower, you're gonna get a different type of extraction. It might not extract all the flavors that you want. If you go a little bit higher, it's going to, and you can hear that beeping, that means I need to pour again. If you go a little bit higher, it depends on the coffee that you're using. Maybe if you're using a nice light roast, you can actually go for those higher ratios, but it extracts the coffee differently. It's gonna make it a little bit more watery. So by looking at this number here, I can, instead of calculating in my head what's 15 times whatever, 15, 16, 17, I can just look at the number and keep pouring. So that's one of the benefits of using the Exagram Pro, but also for a pour over is you get to decide whichever ratio you want on the fly. So we're at around 1 to 13 now. And then just quickly about water temperature, it's also going to depend on the coffee that you're using, but I prefer to go for around 90 to 95 degrees Celsius for my pour overs. If you're going with a lighter roast, again, go a little bit higher. If you're going with a darker roast, go a little bit lower. And here I am at a 1:15 ratio. Put the kettle away. By the way, if you want, you can turn those beeps off. You just have to put it on a different setting. There's on with sound, on without sound, and then off. And I'm gonna get deeper into the Exagram Pro in a different video. So there we go, we're finished dripping through. I'm gonna put the coffee on my drip catcher over here. And then, it smells really nice. I'm actually gonna close that up because I wanna do a side-by-side taste test once I'm done with the Pipamoka. So we'll keep that nice and secure in our Octaroma. And as you can see, it doesn't drip at all. It's really nice for on the go. All right, let's get into the Pipamoka. So taking it apart, we've got the lid, which is also a drip catcher here. So put that to the side. We've got the funnel, which I'll show you how to use in just a second. And then we've got the filter here. So this is not a paper filter. This is a metal filter, okay? So you can see here, it's all metal, but it filters really, really nicely. And I'm gonna show you how it works right now. Put that here, just to show you how it comes apart. All right, so you can pull it apart, but the idea is that we're actually gonna be twisting it apart. And before I go any further, I have to change the grind size a little bit. So I don't wanna use 40 clicks. I actually would prefer to use 30 clicks on this brewer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I've just gone back from 40 to 30, tightening it up a little bit. We're gonna take this off of pour over mode. All right, so now we can just tear that up. And I'm gonna measure out approximately 14 grams or a little bit more because this brewer works a little bit differently. And I'll explain why in just a second. All right. So the way this works is we take the filter, the bottom part, we put the funnel on, all right, and then we're gonna tear. But the thing is, as you can see, this fits a certain amount of coffee. This one, I just wanna make sure that it's filled to the top. So by tearing it and pouring in the coffee, I could probably put in a little bit more to get to about 14. But I personally wouldn't wanna go too much more than that because, as you can see, I did a really nice mountain of coffee here. And the reason for that is because I don't want anything along that rim, right? So when I put this on, I want to make sure it just presses down and secures firmly without any cracks. So it's very flush here. The other consideration is that depending on the coffee, you'll be able to fit more or less in. Also depending on the grind size, right? So different coffees are different densities. It depends on the roast, but it also depends on the altitude in which it's grown and a few different factors. So let's aim for around 14 grams in this case. You may be able to get around 16 in if you use a lighter roasted coffee, for example, and you may not be able to get even 14 in if you use a darker roasted coffee. So just keep that in mind. There is a bit of a range. Now for the next part, I'm actually gonna set my kettle here to 100 degrees Celsius. It's not because we're gonna be brewing at 100 degrees Celsius or boiling point, but it's because I know by the time I put it in here, and by the time the coffee hits it through the filter, it's gonna be at a great brewing temperature. And the other thing I want to mention is there are lines, 4 different lines inside the Pipamoka to help us measure the brew ratios essentially. So what I'm doing here is I like to just fill it up to the shortest line. That's a full cup of coffee. And then we've got 14 grams of coffee in here. We don't actually have to use the scale at this point. And the benefit of using the Pipamoka as well is you don't really have to use the scale at any point throughout the process as long as you know what you're working with. So it's really great in that sense if you're going on a hike or you're going traveling and you just want to take the brewer and maybe some ground coffee that you ground up before you left, because then you can just pop it in the capsule or the little basket, and then you've got your hot water here, and we're just gonna let that float to the bottom, okay? So my rule of thumb is to just let it float on its own all the way to the bottom of the chamber here. It's gonna bubble, obviously, because the water is getting in with the grounds, and there's obviously air pockets between the grounds that it's it's filling up and it's doing sort of its pre-infusion, all right? So we're doing that first, but there are, like I said, there's 4 different lines. But while it does that, I'm going to explain the lines that I was talking about. So those lines help you to measure whether it's a much stronger brew, and then it gets increasingly up to a full cup of coffee. So if you wanted to, you could do a measurement of how much water fills up to those lines, a measurement of how much coffee you put in the basket, do a quick calculation, do a division, and find out what the ratio is. But in this case, just to keep it simple, I'm going to show you how this works. So this goes down to the bottom. I'm going to do the full cup here, 14 grams in. All right. Now it's at the bottom. I'm not going to start twisting yet. I'm going to put the lid back on. And now I'm going to start with the slow twist. All right. So while I do this, I'll explain some of the benefits of this brewer. As I mentioned just now, I think it's really easy to bring with you because you don't need a whole lot of equipment. You don't really need a scale in order to get good results because it's all measured out for you in the brewer. Another thing to keep in mind, as you can see here, I'm actually twisting quite slowly. Nice and slow and steady. You don't want to twist too fast because you're actually using the negative pressure that's in the bottom here to make sure that it's extracting the water through, it's extracting the coffee, the water's going from here to here. And you can also check to see how the water's doing. So it's slowly going down. If you had a bunch of water sitting on top, that would tell you maybe you're going either twisting too fast or you've ground too fine. So that is just some troubleshooting that you're gonna have to go through depending on the coffee you're using, depending on the dose that you're using. All right. And another benefit here that I find is you can actually brew while you're moving or while you're hiking or walking or maybe even on a train or something without risking the spillage as much as you would with the pour over, of course. And I'm gonna check the bottom. If you do realize that there's still a bit of water on the top, that's okay. It just means that it didn't go through all the way yet. You might have to adjust your twisting speed or your grind size, as I mentioned before, but you can also just pull it off and you're gonna have a slightly stronger brew. So we're gonna put the lid here, as I mentioned before, the drip catcher, and it's just gonna catch all the excess water that might have been on top or just the drips of coffee. All right, so now we've got our Pipamoka brew. We've got our Cuppamoka brew. And as you can imagine, both of these are quite hot, still too hot for me to sip on and really get any flavor notes out of. So what I'm gonna do is grab these 2 glasses here so you can see as well some of the differences in the brew, because it's not just about the taste, but it's also the texture and sometimes the visual element. So check that out. I don't know if you can see as well as I can. They both look very similar, but I will tell you from what I can see from my angle is the Cuppamoka, the filter coffee brewer, is a little bit more clear, a little bit more see-through. Still coffee at the end of the day, you can't see the bottom, but the other one, the Pipamoka, it's slightly more opaque, all right? So it looks less translucent. So you might change different coffees in depending on what flavors you wanna get from these brewers. The filter coffee brewer, the Cuppamoka, might be better for more delicate coffees, maybe lighter roasts, something that you want to get those nuanced flavors from, whether it's floral, citrus, a little bit more acidic. Whereas this one, it's just more full-bodied. It's more chocolatey. Even though we're using the same coffee, it's even maybe a little bit on the sweet side, but you can feel that texture in the cup. It's not as textural as maybe a French press, where you're letting through a lot more sediment. As I mentioned, this filter, it works really, really well. It just seems to take most of the sediments out, but you can see visually there is a slight difference. But yeah, in terms of the flavor, those would be the main considerations. A little bit more full-bodied, full-textured on the chocolatier side, maybe better for slightly more medium, more darker roasts, whereas this one, you can just get a little bit more of those delicate flavors from the cup. So let's put those aside. Both very good. But just before we close, I always want to discuss the cleanup, right? Because this is something that people ask quite a bit. How are they to clean? You know, it's great to brew a nice coffee while you're on the go and all, but what's going to happen when I want to pack it up and move on to my next spot? So for the Cuppamoka, pretty intuitive. If you've ever used a pour over coffee brewer before, you just take the paper filter out. Got my little knock box here, and you can put it in there, or if you're hiking, throw it in the woods. And then we've got a little bit of the drips here. This actually goes in the top. As I mentioned, this unlocks, and then we can screw that back on to our cup, put the lid back on, and we're ready to go. With this one, we've got the drip tray, as I mentioned. Just take the little drips out there, and then it's a little bit more detailed. So we're gonna catch the basket here, and then we're gonna open that up, and I'll show you what that looks like. All right, and then same with the knock box, you just knock it out, and check that out. All right, so fairly clean. Of course, you can give this a wipe, or if you're just storing it to head back home and clean it when you get there, just put the basket back together. And then you do have to bring this ring back up to the top, take your vessel again, and then push it back in, basket, funnel, lid, and you're ready to go. One thing I didn't mention, by the way, I'll take this as my example, is you can use this lid, of course, as a lid, as you might want to. So you just screw it on here, and it's another little travel mug for you. Of course, it doesn't have the same sippy capabilities as this one, but it's just a different style. This one you can just undo when you're ready to drink, take a sip, put it back on. And just to wrap up, Cuppamoka, classic pour over brewer. Pipamoka, a little bit less conventional vacuum extracting brewer. Slightly different use cases, very similar results, but it just depends what you want to use it for. I typically like to travel with this. You know, if I'm going to be in a hotel, Airbnb, or at a friend's place, I can make myself a nice pour over in the morning. This, all the same use cases apply, but it's even nice to bring on a bike ride or a hike or a run or something like that. So you can stop, make a coffee, and continue on your way without too much extra gear to carry with you. So if you've used one of these brewers before and you have some insights, do leave them in the comments below for other people to read and benefit from. If you haven't yet, tell me which one you would like to use first. And if you got something out of this video, hit us a like. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next video.